Welcome back to Account Management Secrets. One of the questions I get all the time is, what does a great post-sale team actually look like? How do you reduce churn, forecast renewals, build QBRs that executives actually want to attend, and create a team that continues to perform as the company grows? Today's guest is Daniel Santiago, Senior Vice President of Customer Success at OrthoFi, and he's been hard at work on this for a while. Daniel has spent more than 25 years leading post-sale teams, including the last 8 years helping scale OrthoFi while achieving a 108% net revenue retention rate. We get into the mechanics of how he thinks about leadership, forecasting, identifying risk before accounts churn, and transforming QBRs from tactical check-ins into conversations focused on measurable business outcomes. Here's my conversation with Daniel Santiago. If you're an account manager, you're the one keeping the business running. You own the client relationships, drive the revenue, and solve the tough problems for your customers. Most companies don't give account managers the training or recognition they deserve. That's what you'll get here on the Account Management Secrets podcast. In this show, we cover exactly what you need to succeed. If that sounds like what you've been looking for, hit subscribe and let's get into it. Hey, Daniel, thanks for joining me. Welcome to Account Management Secrets.
Hey, Alex, how are you doing today?
I'm great. And I was excited to talk to you because you have a really interesting and rich career in the customer success space. You're currently the Senior Vice President of Customer Success at OrthoFi, and you've been with that company for a good long while. 8 years is a good run. They're coming up on 8 years. And before that, you were with ServiceSource. So you were someone who has seen the ins and outs and the bones of a lot of customer success organizations and frameworks, which is cool. So it's fun to talk to kind of like an OG, if you will. So glad you're here. I want to just start by walking through the career that you have had specifically at OrthoFi. And I'm going to have some gaps in my knowledge, right? But I know that you have been building up a team as you've been going. You started as a director, you moved into account management. Now you're the SVP of customer success. What I'm curious about is I want to know what that journey was like, and I want to know what was evolving and changing for you along the way. So there's a lot of stuff there, but why don't we just at least start with tell us about the path you've been on.
Sure. Yeah, no, and really excited to be here. So thanks for having me. So I started at OrthoFi coming up on 8 years ago after a really great run at ServiceSource, where I was for 17 years and spent time all over the world at ServiceSource. Spent 5 years in Dublin, Ireland, getting that operation up and running. And so when the opportunity came up for OrthoFi, the honest answer is I saw a ton of parallels between the business I was leaving and the OrthoFi business. And the key amongst them being that it's, with all the noise of software as a subscription and all the different things, this is really a tech-enabled managed service. And so that's what ServiceSource was, and that's what OrthoFi is. So I was really excited at the opportunity to get into another sort of early stage opportunity. And essentially the role that was available was a little bit lower than what I had come from at ServiceSource. But as I've done a lot in my career, I bet on myself, and I decided that it was more important to me to work at the organization and figure out where I fit in later on. So took the role as director of account management. Pretty quickly, it became obvious that a lot of infrastructure was needed, and started running some of those playbooks that I'm sure your listeners are super familiar with in terms of just putting in the basic plumbing, and was able to, not just grow the team, but actually deliver some pretty impressive results in short order, which just allowed us to continue to invest in the customer success function.
Okay, that's cool. And so tell us a little bit more detail about that.
Yeah.
How big was the company when you joined? How big is it now? What was the initial scope, and how did that evolve over time?
Yeah, so it was about, I think, 175, 180 employees when I started 8 years ago. We're now pushing up against 400 employees 8 years later. The account management team, if you want to call it that, was branded Ortho Success. So we do at OrthoFi serve the orthodontic market. So a little bit of branding there in terms of the Ortho Success team, but really it was a team of 7 account managers that were regionally dispersed, responsible for orthodontic practices within their region. And their job was essentially to make sure that the customers were happy, that they were using the solution, and that they weren't thinking about bringing the business back in house or coming up with another solution. It was very much a churn avoidance play. And so once I came in and really started to understand the lay of the land, the work began in terms of, yes, of course, how do we make sure that churn stays low, but also how do we figure out ways to enhance the customer experience and perhaps bring other opportunities to bear where the customer can see even more value within the OrthoFi ecosystem.
And that means new products and services, or what are you referring to there?
Well, products is its own sort of thing. So what we did from a services perspective was come up with ways to uh, educate the customers on the true value that OrthoFi was actually bringing to them. And also, I guess you would call it further adoption of different opportunities that they didn't know they had access to not only help improve their business, but also increase the revenue for OrthoFi.
And when you first joined, were you actually running individual accounts? Like, did you have your own accounts, or were you a team leader?
I did not. I came in to be the director of that team of 7. At that point, they had a shared leader who was also responsible for all of sales for OrthoFi. So I came in to help give that person some lift, and eventually to break it out entirely into its own organization.
Okay, got it. So, okay, cool, great. So I'm curious about this because there's so much overlap, right? There's so much overlap: sales, account management, customer success. Who does what, and so on.
Yep.
And so, tell us about that. So you said when you first joined, there was a revenue leader, CRO, or whatever that person was called, and you were under that group, and then you've since split out. Like, I'm really curious. We all want to know. All the listeners want to know, like, what was that conversation like? What were the trade-offs? What happened
Sure.
in carving this out as its own unit?
Yeah, and I, from experience myself in my career, as also having a lot of peers in the industry, I know that those things can be dramatic, controversial, et cetera. A lot of things. I got super fortunate in that whole thing. The leader at the time was really focused on new business, owning marketing, owning all of the go to market, if you will. And while he was super passionate about our customers, he really was looking for a bit more ability to focus on the new business coming in, and was more than happy to sort of relinquish or hand off to someone who he trusted the reins in terms of looking after the installed base. Probably, if I'm being fair, the reason for that is OrthoFi at the time was really a in for a penny, in for a pound solution. So there really wasn't the upsell, cross sell opportunities that you may typically see at other SaaS or tech enabled managed service organizations. It really was, once that deal was sold, there was very little, if any, incremental to be gained. So the idea of land and expand really wasn't a thing. And so it was sort of the perfect opportunity to have that clean break between top line or new revenue and looking after the existing revenue stream. So once I came in, got established, everyone understood, my background and what I'm about, it became a pretty easy conversation with that particular leader. I did stay reporting to him for probably the next year or so, but eventually we broke out customer success into its own organization.
And when you did that, when you broke out customer success into its own organization, how did you define success? Like, what did your new metrics become? What were you reporting on? What did people care about as it relates to what your team was doing?
Sure. Churn continued to be the North Star metric, and that's only very recently sort of adjusted. I know we're going to get to this a little bit later, but we boast 100% NR, 108% NRR, right? So we're actually getting ahead of just the pure churn retention metric at that point. We actually are adding revenue year over year from the installed base, but that's a more recent development. In the past, churn was the 100% the North Star metric. I think when I came in, we were probably at a 15% churn rate. Really happy to say, even in that first year, we saw, I think, 8 points of improvement and kind of continued to push between 8 to 10 year over year. So very pleased and proud of that performance. But really, that was the number one thing that was on everyone's mind. And then also the lead ups to what eventually becomes churn. So a lot of focus on what we call the watch list or the at-risk customers. And one of the things, and this precedes me, but I'm happy to continue to carry the torch, OrthoFi is a customer-obsessed organization. Everything begins and ends with the customer in mind, and I'm sure a lot of folks, say that and boast that, but I get to live it every day, which is awesome. And because of the nature of what we do, which is, again, a tech-enabled managed service, there's a bit of outsourcing. There's a bit of, we actually do on behalf of our customers the work that they used to be doing. It's required to be that customer obsessed. And it's required to have enough manpower and people to ensure that the practices are seeing the full value of the solution. And the reality is humans make mistakes, right? We're not perfect. We'll probably get to that a little bit later. Machines make mistakes too. But in the case where you're talking about a pure software play, a lot of times some of those mistakes are shared. In a managed services world where our teams are doing the work, yep, sometimes we get it wrong.
You own it. You break it. 100%.
Right? Yeah. And so it's incumbent on us to have a robust customer success team that isn't just there to react to those things, is there to try to stay ahead of them, is there to bring the two organizations together to ensure that, again, 1 + 1 = 3. We're all trying to get to the same place. And it's really about building camaraderie in cases where there might otherwise be some tension about, competition.
So there's a number of things from what you were just talking about that I want to drill into. What I heard you say was your current churn rate is about 7%. So gross revenue retention of about 93%. That's good. Average for private SaaS companies, at least I know you're not quite SaaS, but average private SaaS companies is about 86%. So you guys are significantly over there. But I also heard you say when you first joined, it was at about 15% churn, so 85%. Gross revenue retention. And then you said within those first 12 months, it went up by about 8 points.
Yeah.
What did you do to make that change? Like, why did that? That's a significant move in a short period of time. What did you show up and do differently?
So there were a number of things in that first year that we did. And again, this is for those of you that are part of startups or have been, this will all sound very familiar. We didn't have a CRM, right? The account managers were focused on using, I think it was, they were using email and they were using the notes function within their, Apple iPhones or iPads or what have you, right? So they were keeping track of, call it 50, 60, 80 organizations using those tools. It can work, but it's not ideal.
It doesn't work.
Right?
It doesn't work. No.
Well, to be fair, yes. And so very quickly we identified, the bare minimum in terms of tools that we needed to get this team to, the next level. Another thing that we were experiencing acutely was the churn wasn't happening sort of later stage. Like once we got to 6 months, once we got to a year, 2, 3, 4 years, customers saw the value. They were extremely happy. They got through the rough times and they were so happy they made the decision to work with us. What we were seeing acutely was getting them to that 6 months, getting to that year was where all the problems were happening. So we did some, I think pretty basic things in terms of putting in some adoption plays, some other things. We focused really intently on training and implementation with the adoption carryover to understand those things that were kind of nipping at us in the beginning and really put more focus and energy and attention on that. We also up-leveled our analytics game. We started to rely less on emotion and, hey, is it how, phone calls, hey, checking in, how's everything going? And starting to shift, and we continue that shift to providing real data and analytics to support the whether it's the good news that we're bringing or the challenges that we're having, and having those fact-based conversations versus emotion to actually convince the customer that they made the right decision. So we had some really great success with those adoption plays. I think that's what really helped us in that first year to kind of make that big jump from, call it 85% to 93-ish. It was really about just some pretty easy things that we weren't getting right in that very critical early stages of the partnership. We had something like, 70% churn within the first 6 months. It was a crazy number that we were able to bring down significantly.
And that's interesting, because this is one of these areas where there's a lot of tension and conflict inside of companies, because if you get churn, it'll show up like the account manager, the customer success manager takes the blame, right? Like, oh, your customer left, and they're like, shit, what did I do? And so on, and like turns into a whole thing. But what you're identifying there is, a lot of that is before you're really in the proper account management world anyway. Like, you're talking about basically onboarding and getting the customer up and running, and getting time to value quickly. And so that's presumably a big part of the decision to split your team in, like to create this own team, so that you can have all the resources there to map against the entirety of the customer lifecycle. I'm guessing that was part of the conversation, right?
100%. And it was also to, make sure that, to your point, a lot of times when you're experiencing that level of churn in the early stages, it's not necessarily about how the product is performing. It is a lot of times about expectation setting. And then you bring all of that all the way back to the sales process. And were they fully sold? Were they educated on that there are going to be bumps in the road? Anytime you do a transition like ours, where you've been doing things within your practice for a long time a certain way, and OrthoFi comes in and says, listen, there's a better way. It's going to be hard in the beginning, but we promise you the results will be there in the end. And the results being, significant improvement in your conversion, significant improvement in your cash flow, all these wonderful things, but it's going to require that you trust us and that you do things the way we tell you to do them. That is not an easy thing in practice. It's great on a PowerPoint. It's great when you're talking to a doctor who may not be involved in the day-to-day. Once you get into it, it can be pretty difficult change management. And so that was another thing we sort of identified, was not to ever put blame on sales of they always do the best, or they always are thorough, or they always do all those things, right? But it's how do we bridge those gaps, and how do we have a more seamless handoff so that when sales has done what they need to do, they hand it off to the training, implementation, and adoption teams, and eventually the customer success team to, like you said, continue that life cycle from the minute that contract's closed all the way through, to ensure that there's a seamless and that there aren't any gotchas or surprises. And that was I think the very specific thing that we helped solve in that first year.
So what did you change in the handoff process?
We formalized a number of things in terms of what was required from sales to, checklists and other things to be able to educate the teams that were going to be inheriting the business. We identified, certain areas that we ran into time and time again where we saw some of those gaps. And it was really about communicating internally and educating and making sure that what they were hearing in those very critical times at the beginning of the partnership was the same as what they were hearing during the sales process. I think before that connectivity, there was a lot of disconnect in terms of, well, the salesperson said this, or the customer success person said that. And those things, especially in that early stage when you just don't know yet, you haven't necessarily seen the results you were promised, that can lead to a lot of uncomfortable and unfortunate conversations.
Daniel, you also mentioned what you call the watch list, which is at-risk accounts or things that need your attention. Tell us what that is, who looks at it, what gets on the list, how things get resolved. Like, tell us the whole philosophy around that.
Yeah, again, it's in the spirit of being, what we like to call, reasonably paranoid or comfortably paranoid, in terms of always wanting to understand what's going on within our customers. Are they happy? Are they fulfilled? Are they seeing the value? and looking at, both quantitative as well as some, other metrics in terms of interactions and engagement to build a picture internally that says, is the customer healthy? Are they happy? If we find that there are things that we're concerned about, better to be safe than sorry. We want to make sure that we're putting those customers in a different bucket to ensure that they're getting the love and attention that they need, or that there are problems, whether it be with the operations group, the managed services function, or the product itself, that need to be addressed. And so, as I said earlier, this is a very customer obsessed company. This is something that gets looked at each and every day, each and every week. On a monthly basis, we get all the stakeholders within the business, up to and including the CEO of our company, on calls where we review the watch list and we talk about what we're learning, how we're progressing, what cross-functional support we need to ensure that those customers, if they are in a spot where they're not seeing value or they're struggling, we can remedy that and get the joint power of the organization to bring that to bear faster.
So as of today, you have roughly 2,000 customers, something like that?
Yeah, in the ballpark. Again, across, from the early days that I was mentioning, we've now done 2 acquisitions. And so we do have additional products in the space. So on OrthoFi proper, which is not just the company, it's also the flagship product, we probably have about 800 customers. The remaining 1,200 would be across those other products. Correct.
And so how many are on the watch list at any one time? And like, how do I get stuff on the watch list? Am I flagging this myself, or is it coming from some analytics platform? Like, is it coming from an NPS result? How does stuff get on there, and what are you tracking?
So we leverage, we have a couple tools now, again, coming back from the early days when we were using notes and email. We are a Salesforce shop now, and we also leverage HubSpot as our customer success platform. So between those 2 systems, we do have a tremendous amount of predictive analytics and other things that we've programmed in there to be warning signs for the OSMs, the Ortho Success Managers, to be able to manage their portfolio. It's a combination. It's not, you're not ever going to get automatically added to the watch list through the metrics. It's ultimately the Ortho Success Manager's call. The leadership within that team and me, myself, I'm a big believer in, better to be safe than sorry. So if you have any sort of doubt, put them on the watch list. If they're only on there for a short amount of time, awesome. And I think this will resonate. The last, the biggest killer in CS organizations are those green to gone customers, right? Where you think everything's wonderful, you think everything's great, and the next thing you know, you're getting a churn notification and you're saying, what the heck just happened, right? So I really hate that. I hate having to explain it. I hate having to stand there and say so I'd rather have some indication or something versus just being blissful and then finding out that they're unhappy.
So I think that's a really important point. And sometimes people misunderstand me when I talk about risk management, because it's a big topic, right? Is understanding where there's risk in the portfolio. And there's times when I think, there's actually no such thing as a green account. An account is never actually fully green. There's always something lurking underneath there. But the point is, and I'd love to get your reaction to this, like, people think, oh, if I create a watch list or a risk register, then, if I have to put my account on there, then like, that's bad, right? Like, I'm going to get in trouble. Like, people are going to start looking at me and scrutinizing what I'm doing. So there's a lot of culture that needs to get built around this to essentially say, we want to get the bad news out as early as possible so that we can all talk about it as a team and go come up with a solution. Don't think of it as like, nobody's getting in trouble. I hope at OrthoFi, nobody's getting in trouble for putting something on the watch list. So how do you build that culture and like get everyone to that, like, what do they call it? Psychological safety around working with this?
Yeah, we actually have the opposite view here, right? Which is you're actually going to get rewarded for being that canary in the coal mine. It shows that you're putting a level of rigor into your accounts that's necessary in order to ensure that they're being looked after. One of the folks that I was lucky enough to work for in my career, a CEO at ServiceSource, Chris Carrington, used to say, bad news doesn't get better with time, right? And so I preach that all the time to our teams in terms of sitting on information or being nervous or anxious about it. It's not going to make it any better. What's going to make it better is action. And so that's what the whole intent of the watch list is to get action where it's needed. And like I said, it's the opposite effect. You're probably going to face more scrutiny if, like I said, you have one of those or a couple of those green to gone type situations versus the ones where you're being proactive, you're putting them on that watch list, you're getting it out there, even if it isn't something serious. Knowledge is power. At least it draws attention, and who knows, maybe it actually brings us some focus on things that we weren't aware of, even if it wasn't a huge issue with that particular customer. So we really preach proactivity here, and that's part of being customer obsessed. And it's, like I said, being a little bit productively paranoid, just to ensure that we're making sure that we're leaving no stone unturned.
What else do you do to minimize forecast variance? So, there's this idea that, like, by and large, you don't really get fired for churn. You get fired for surprise churn, or not fired. Like, the issue is not the churn so much as the surprise. And so I've had other people on this podcast over time who've been telling me, look, we try to get within a very narrow window of our forecast, because the whole business is relying on your forecast, right? You've got the bulk of the entire company's revenue coming through your team. And if you're off by a couple of points, that can mean lots of millions of dollars, which impacts, hiring and all the other things that the team wants to do. And so I know that a big part of this is like trying to get as close as possible. So what else do you do to minimize your forecast variance?
Yeah, I think it's all related, Alex, right? I think, again, we've been very fortunate. We've, knock on wood, had a very consistent churn number for the last several years. And so, if you're thinking about closest to the pin, we're pretty consistent in terms of getting it in that area. It comes back to some of that, productive paranoia. Let's not be trying to boast a super clean and strong watch list. Let's make sure that we're erring on the side of caution there, which then has a knock-on effect where, if anything, maybe we're a little bit inflated on our churn forecast, but that's always good news if we can come in under that, right? So it's a bit of the under promise, over deliver, or for my sales friends out there, sandbagging. Maybe that is a little bit of it, but it really is about making sure that if we are going to miss, we're missing on the side of being perhaps a bit pessimistic versus too optimistic with the churn number.
And what's your tolerance window? What are you trying to aim for on your forecast accuracy?
I mean, plus or minus 5%, which I realize is sort of, may seem a little bit strict, but again, we operate here under, some things that are pretty advantageous for us. Like I said, having that track record of strong performance, having a very sticky product that is very involved with our customers. If there is going to be that churn event, and it's usually a long time coming, and it's usually a really tough decision that we have plenty of opportunity to try to, counteract. Sometimes, it just isn't the right fit, and sometimes it's just not the right fit anymore. But we're pretty fortunate to have a lot of those bellwethers that we can, see it coming.
And again, just to repeat the point here, the issue is not that a customer is going to leave. Like, you can see it and you can say, look, there's all these reasons it might have happened, and some are within your control, some are outside of your control, et cetera. If you can see that coming 6, 9, 12, 18 months in advance, great. You can let the business know, you can make all the necessary decisions and resource allocations and so on. That typically is, it's a bummer. Like, people are disappointed, but it's not anywhere near as like, oh shit, we just got this notice and they're gone in 30 days. Has a very different feeling to that, right?
100%. And again, it comes back to, I don't know any other way than to be proactive and to have, more than less eyes and arms and legs on it, right? And so, we talked a little bit about, the size of teams, and, we have a pretty large customer success organization compared to perhaps other companies of our size. A lot of that has to do with as I said earlier, we're a tech-enabled managed service. We're not a SaaS application. And because, managed services can be messy, we need to have folks at the ready to help smooth those things over, explain them, and get ahead of them. And so proactivity and having those, real conversations with your customers, there's no substitute for that, in my opinion. And that's what allows us to feel confident in our forecast and feel confident that at the end of the day, our churn is going to be where it needs to be.
So, what's like really, really on my mind these days is QBRs. So we're running the QBR mastery program in Amplify right now. So like everyone's like really gung ho on QBRs and getting them right. What do your QBRs look like?
Yeah. So obviously it's a super important, kind of meeting for our ortho success managers. In some cases, we actually do monthly business reviews, so MBRs. But at a minimum, we do QBRs with our practices. They've changed a bit over the years, as I said earlier. In the beginning, it was more about highlighting all the great things that OrthoFi was doing. Yes, making sure that the customers were feeling looked after, feeling like they were getting the value. But it was much more, I would say, tactically focused on, we had XYZ issues this last month, this last quarter. Can you help get these fixed? I'm really proud to say we've been transforming and transitioning that in large part with the help of our operations team to take a lot of that tactical stuff off of the ortho success managers' plates so they could focus more on the data, the analytics, and helping the customers understand how they can drive more revenue from their business. So the MBRs and QBRs today are much more focused on the analytics and much more focused on how the actions of the practice combined with the actions of OrthoFi can help get them revenue that they hadn't seen before, and how that can be the building blocks for additional opportunities in the future. And so, whereas before it was much more tactical break fix, today it's much more about the actual business, which is where we strive to be and continue to go, particularly as we add hopefully more and different products into the ecosystem where customers can understand how those products can add additional value.
One of the biggest issues, bugbears, problems that account managers have with QBRs is they can start to feel stale and routine. And
Yeah.
another thing that happens is it's hard to attract the senior people into the meeting. You get a
Yeah.
lot of like, oh, call me if you need me, or they'll show up for the first 10 or 15 minutes or what have you. What do you do about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we are certainly not unique in that sense. We have a difficult time getting, in this case, the doctors or the business owners to make the time. And again, they're busy folks, right? So it's a little bit different in the we serve two very distinct groups of customers. There's the sole proprietor practices, the ones that are owned by the doctor, and they have a team that runs the day to day, and they're obviously also right there in the trenches seeing patients. And then we have what's called the OSO DSO group. Now, these are typically private equity backed organizations that roll up orthodontic practices and build, larger entities, and they try to, get economies of scale, and they tend to do things very similarly, leverage similar technologies, et cetera, et cetera. Those groups have more traditional executive teams that are there to attend MBRs and QBRs. So we have a bit of an easier time getting the attendance from those folks for all the reasons that I just said. It's hard to make time during the day when you're seeing patients and you're running a business to take the time out to do this. That said, it's really about trying to make it as compelling as possible, right? So it's not just about the meeting itself, it's the lead up to the meeting, and it's getting them excited about, here's what we're going to discuss, here's what we found, leveraging, like I said, more of the analytics and data. And this is something that we continue to invest in, but it's really made a big impact in terms of, if you can get the doctor or the owner excited about revenue potential, excited about how they're going to be able to get more patients to start treatment with them, those are the things that are going to get them to attend those meetings. And so we try to do a really good job of building that up and then delivering on it within those QBR meetings.
Yeah. I mean, those are the kind of insights that are going to get people to that meeting.
Yep. It's what's in it for them, right? I mean, again, we all have a finite, hours in the day. Where am I going to get my biggest bang for my buck? If it's going to be from a trusted partner that says they think they have additional opportunities, I'm going to try to find a way to make that meeting.
So let's get a little bit more specific on the QBRs. What are you actually doing in these things? Like, what sort of information are you sharing? What are you doing to build a moat around the customer, which is what a QBR is all about?
Yeah, we're on this journey again to continue to get away from more of the call it emotional side of customer success. I had these issues, I had these errors this past month, week, et cetera. What are you guys going to do to fix it? And try to up level it more to a fact based analytic discussion. One of the things that we have begun doing, and this is again a work in progress, but we've completely revamped our sales process. And we essentially have made that process a bit of a, from a pre sales function perspective, what I'd like to call, sort of discovery based on actual results. And so we have a
So you
sales
do like
engineering.
you do like an assessment or something like that.
Yeah, we have a sales engineering team now that pulls a bit of qualitative and quantitative data from the practice and essentially uses that data to benchmark them against their peers and show them, most importantly, show them where we think we can take performance if they were to use the OrthoFi platform. And so that level sets them on a business case and an ROI that they can then use to make the decision. What's really cool about this for customer success, and we're in the process of building this, is being able to take that artifact and use that as the baseline for the MBR and QBR conversations that we're going to have. And so our QBRs, aspirationally looking forward, are always going to be about going back and tying back to where were you before you started working with OrthoFi, and what results have we driven that we can quantify very specifically based on the pre versus the now to be able to demonstrate the value that OrthoFi is driving. And so I'm super excited about that. That's something that we did at ServiceSource, and we've been able to bring it over here to OrthoFi, and we've had tremendous success with that because it's real results that the customers can see the value of the money that they're spending on the solution actually paying back dividends. So that's an awesome tool that we're really excited to continue to roll out.
So I want to shift a little bit here and change topics to talk about how you interact with the leadership and investors at OrthoFi. So OrthoFi, correct me if I'm wrong here, but OrthoFi is private equity owned by Excel KKR. And therefore, you are, your ultimate owners are private equity investors who tend to operate different from public company investors. They operate different from venture capitalists. They tend to have a very specific way of thinking about the world and of the companies and assets that they own. So with that in mind, walk us through, help us understand what are their thoughts, assumptions, and expectations of your group and your unit, and how it is that you guys are contributing to the enterprise value of the company.
Yeah. I guess first and foremost, Excel KKR has been awesome partners. They're very engaged, very involved. I wouldn't say they're hands-on necessarily. They are when they need to be, but it becomes very clear that you're very well supported and they're there if ever you need any help. And I have, regular meetings with folks, within AKKR, not just at the time for board meetings, but, really all year round, to be able to bounce ideas, get ideas, do other things. So they've been an awesome partner. As it relates to how they view customer success, obviously, they are appreciative of the churn performance. I think that in a lot of ways is table stakes, right? You have to be able to, if you have a viable product and solution, you got to be able to keep those customers happy and keep them there. Where they continue to push, and I think in a lot of good ways, is how do you continue to mine the installed base for additional revenue opportunities? I don't think OrthoFi is unique in the last few years where top line growth has been challenging. It's really hard to get new opportunities in the funnel and then get those opportunities to convert. And so it's incumbent on customer success leaders to try to contribute as much as we can to that top line number through additional opportunities. As I said earlier, it's not as straightforward as maybe in some organizations with OrthoFi because the preponderance of our revenue comes from OrthoFi where there really isn't upsell, cross-sell. What we've been doing with AKKR's support is an initiative that we're calling Maximize the Platform, which is really our existing Ortho Success teams helping educate the the practices on what are some other ancillary parts of OrthoFi that I can adopt? What are some other things that I could be doing within my business that OrthoFi allows me to do that I haven't done previously? A really good example of this is interest. So the OrthoFi platform, not to get too involved here, allows practices to charge interest on payment plans, whereas before, if a practice was doing this themselves, they would look at the months of treatment, feeling hesitant to go beyond treatment length, even though they have, a 780 credit score and all these other things. We can encourage them to start allowing the system to charge interest for if they want to go out to 36 or 48 months. So that's just one example where if we can evangelize that within the Ortho Success team to get practices to see the opportunity, that has a knock-on effect for them and for us as well.
And if we look at your results here, so you said 108% net revenue retention.
Yep.
93% gross revenue retention. That's 15-point gap between the two. That means that whoever's sticking around, you tend to, on average, be selling 15% more stuff to them every year. Good, great, excellent.
Yep.
What are the operating partners or investing partners at Excel KKR think the targets for those numbers should be?
So they're pleased with 108%. They think that there's definitely more room to grow. Again, it's so business dependent to say on average it needs to be this. I think they believe that we probably have at a minimum another 5 points that could be available to us through better execution, through continuing to educate the practices on all the different ancillary offerings. And again, I'm saying this, not them, but I would be very pleased if we at some point in the future could get to 113%. That's, I think a stretch goal for sure, but one that I'm focused on trying to get to, in the next few years here.
So wrapping up, Daniel, one thing that's plaguing the industry, and this is not just in customer success and account management, this seems to be every function of the business, is executive turnover, right? Like I can't open LinkedIn, I can't open a single newsletter without somebody telling me that, the tenure length of a CRO is now 13 months or 15 months or whatever it is. I know this happens also within the CS world, right? So chief customer officers, heads of account management, heads of customer success, just like the window seems to be closing, like shortening for a lot of people, which not a great thing, right? Obviously not a great thing. You are 8 years into one company.
Yeah.
What is it that you think you have done right? And what are you continuing to do in order to, make sure that you're the right guy for the job?
Yeah. Again, I'm a bit of an outlier, I think. I've essentially spent my career at 2 companies. So I was 17 years at ServiceSource and now coming up on 8 years in OrthoFi. So 25 years in 2 companies is pretty rare these days.
Yeah.
I'd like to say it's something I'm doing, but to me, I hope that obviously I'm not static. I'm not, I don't get to a place where I plateau and then just sort of coast. It's just like what I encourage our teams to do. We got to earn it every single day. We can't stay static. We got to be adapting. We got to be changing. It's about adding value. I mean, at the end of the day, that's why customers stay with companies, and that's why, employees stay with companies. If you're adding that value, if you're continuing to push, the levels of success, good things tend to happen. So, from that perspective, I think that's super important. I think the opportunities are important, right? Why was I able to be at ServiceSource for 17 years? Well, I was the 11th employee at a startup, right? We started up in an apartment on Lombard Street in San Francisco, and through a number of, through hard work and a lot of luck, it ended up being a startup that made good and was around, for even a few years after I left. So that's pretty cool. And that's just a great opportunity. At OrthoFi, I like to think it's about, like I said, continuing to add value, not just within the customer success organization, but as part of the executive leadership team, and taking all the lessons I learned in my 17 years at ServiceSource, like I said, in a very similar, albeit different vertical, but a very similar space in terms of tech-enabled managed service, continuing to help drive the whole of the business towards, the success that we're trying to get to. I've been fortunate to be able to bring a number of folks that worked with me at ServiceSource into OrthoFi. And I think, by and large, my track record is pretty good there in terms of the folks I brought on have been quality. And that's another way to kind of continue to add value, is broadening that network of folks that get it and that, have had success, and helping bring some of that culture and some of that dedication into the business. So I got to tell you, and this is not, BS, I'm as excited now in coming up on year 9 as I was when I first started. We've come a long way. Sometimes it's easy to get lost in, the gap in the gain, right? You still focus on all the things you're not doing versus all that you've accomplished. But, I still feel so bullish on this business and the opportunity that's in front of us. And I just can't wait for this, for the rest of this year and next year to continue making progress towards the ultimate goal.
Fantastic. Well, that sounds like a great place to wrap up. Super conversation. Daniel Santiago, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks very much, Alex. Really appreciate it. It was a great time.